My name is John Williams, a 30-year-old businessman. There's nothing special to note about me. I'm just working as an office clerk at a large wholesaler for alcohol. We don't have a store, but we do deliver beer and wine on credit to a wide variety of eateries, such as bars and izakayas. Each delivery person is in charge of a truck, and when morning comes, they load up barrels of beer and deliver to the stores they're in charge of. As for me, I'm working in an office with only women, handling things like processing credit slips and various chores. I think I've been placed here because they need at least one male hand in the office. Still, it's true that I often have bad experiences because I'm looked down on by people like the driver, the procurement personnel, and the warehouse manager. On top of that, the general affairs department is a women's garden. I feel uncomfortable. I often feel stressed because it feels like I'm caught on the horns of a dilemma. But the reason I'm still at this company is because not everything is bad. I have many colleagues I get along with, and I often get treated well by our regular customers. There are times for ups and downs. It would be the same no matter where I work. The change in my life happened this spring. The cause was a new department manager who joined the company in the middle of the term. He was a tough guy with a background in finance, having served as a branch manager of a regional bank. He had a tendency to try to settle everything with numbers. The department manager was rough from the start. Perhaps he felt pressured to produce results because he was hired in the middle of the term. His demands on us were too high. Suddenly, the previously laid-back atmosphere in the office started to get tense. According to the section chief secretly told me, it seems that the director is suggesting personnel cuts to the president. Indeed, there have been fewer drinking parties recently, and opportunities for outside drinking have been lost. It's a big blow to our company, which delivers alcohol to restaurants. I knew that sales were sluggish. When I heard about this from the team leader, I had a bad feeling. This was because, as far as the director was concerned, my performance seemed to be at rock bottom, and I was well aware that he had me in his sights. Perhaps being the only man among the clerks might give the impression of being incompetent. I had the impression that I was doing a decent job, but the director didn't seem to recognize my efforts at all. In a month after the director took office, the discussions about reduction began. It started with soliciting voluntary retirees. Apparently, no one expressed a desire to leave. The director then prepared a list for the reduction. My name was at the top. He subtly applied pressure, saying, "It's not mandatory, but if you care about the company." Besides me, several delivery personnel and assistants were chosen. It seemed like an arbitrary selection on the director's part. The warehouse keeper's name was on the list, and he was outraged. And rightly so. If the warehouse keeper quit, the company would be thrown into chaos. Because no one else can find a single bottle of wine in the huge warehouse. The president didn't seem to like the list either, but he had difficulty expressing his opinion to the director, who was an elite from the banking world. Even those whose names were on the downsizing list didn't willingly apply to resign just because their names were there. The company atmosphere was like, let's ignore the list, but the director didn't like that. Salespeople aren't in the company during the day. During the day, the director's target was me, the only one left in the office. Even when he didn't have anything to do, he kept loitering around my desk and nitpicking. I sincerely wished he would just stay cooped up in his office. Are you doing only that job every day? You have a tons of work because you're slow. The director would lean over my work and scold me in an unnecessarily loud voice. I guess he wanted everyone in the office to hear. Every day, the office atmosphere got worse because of his yelling. and the director blamed it on me. He said that the reason the employee's motivation isn't increasing is because I'm in the company. I was stunned to be told that being called incompetent and a burden to the company every day was really wearing me down. My stress was reaching its limit. I'm convinced that the reason I blacked out and collapsed while trying to get up from my chair at the office was due to the director. I don't remember anything after falling, but apparently I was quickly rushed to the hospital by an ambulance. I heard from my colleagues that I had been unconscious and appeared to be suffering since I collapsed. It turns out, stress was indeed the direct cause of my collapse. It was a result of a dreadful pattern of stress leading to insomnia and overwork. When they performed the tests upon my emergency arrival at the hospital, the attending physician told me that there seemed to be other worrisome symptoms, which surprised me a bit. It turned out I would have to continue with further diagnostic tests. The results of these thorough tests revealed early-stage colon cancer. Receiving a cancer diagnosis was quite a shock, but I was a little reassured when the doctor told me that since it was in the early stages, there was a high likelihood of complete recovery with surgery. A hospital stay for tests turned out to be a much longer hospitalization than I anticipated, which was bothering me. Just as I thought my hospital stay might drag on a bit longer and contacted my office, the document that the secretary, now named as Nancy, brought me was early retirement papers. She looked very apologetic as she handed them to me, saying she was told by the director to deliver them. "Thank you, who've asked the nasty task." When I spoke to Nancy, who had brought the documents, she told me, "You should just ignore such papers." Of course, I don't want to take early retirement. I shoved the envelope into the drawer of the bedside table in my hospital room. "John, we'll take your temperature and blood pressure now." The nurse came named Kathy, replacing Nancy in the room. The first time I saw her, I was so struck by her beauty that I didn't even realize when the injection was over. Yes, please go ahead." I get overly nervous when Kathy comes in. Her being extremely beautiful is one reason why I get so nervous. On top of that, she never smiles. She's called Iron Mask by the inpatients. It seems her fellow nurses also call her that. Kathy's expressionlessness and her good looks make her appear doubly intimidating. It's not that she's cold or anything like that to the patients. She's a strict yet kind nurse. The young attending physician told me that he's most afraid of being scolded by her. She doesn't raise her voice but seems to be able to express her anger in a quiet, matter-of-fact way. I thought I would be terrified if it were me. "Your pulse is a bit fast. Are you not feeling well?" Kathy, who was taking my pulse, quietly said so. It seems my pulse quickens just by having her near me. I was a little amazed at how nervous I was. "I'm okay. There's nothing wrong with me." As I hastily said that, Katie stared at me fixedly. And then, she let out a small sigh. I started to panic, wondering if I had disappointed her. But her sigh was not one of disappointment. "Don't just dismiss things lightly as okay. You're here to fight a disease, remember. If you're feeling bad or if there's even a slight difference from your norm, make sure to tell us," Kathy said with a serious expression. Then, she deeply bows in my direction, apologizing for her inadequacy. "Wait, why? You don't need to apologize for anything, Kathy. I understand there's a certain atmosphere around me that makes it hard for you to open up. I'm really sorry about that." I wonder if Kathy knows what people call her behind her back. I gently look at her face, wondering if she's hurt. Her usual expressionless face is there. I'll be a good patient." My words slip out awkwardly, as I don't know what to say. Iron-faced Kathy's eyes widen in surprise. Then she quickly returns to her usual expression and simply responds, "I appreciate that." I suddenly feel embarrassed and couldn't say a single word until Kathy left the room. Hospital life is surprisingly busy with continuous tests before surgery. Today, I didn't return to my room until past 3 p.m. after the tests. Dragging my test-weary body into my room, I find that there's already someone there. It's my boss. Just seeing him doubles my exhaustion from the tests. He notices me return to the room and, without any words of consolation, just says, "Hey." I don't feel like responding, but he's still my boss, even if he's not the most pleasant. As an employee, I don't have much room to argue. Quietly, I just sat down on the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Director." That's the unwritten rule for employees, I suppose. My apology was met with a condescending nod from the director. "I've heard you're in for a long stay. Have you received the early retirement forms? Why haven't you submitted them yet? The company would be better off without deadweight like you." He spoke to me as though I were a child, which got under my skin. I must have let my irritation show. The director gave a nasty grin. He was trying to rile me up, I knew that, but his attitude was hard to stomach. "You came all this way to tell me that. I'm sorry for the trouble, but I have no intention of retiring early." I tried to choose my words carefully, trying to stay as calm as possible. Really, I wanted to shout him down and send him packing. The director smirked as if he could read my thoughts, and he didn't stop. If I caused a scene here, he might use that as an excuse to fire me. The tension hung in the air between the director and me, like a standoff. The one who shattered that tension was Nurse Kathy. "Excuse me, I believe I asked you to call me with the nurse call button once you return from your tests. Have you forgotten?" The hospital room door burst open, and in strode Nurse Kathy, glancing back and forth between the director and me. "I'm sorry, but could you please leave the room?" Her voice was soft, but there was an undeniable authority in it. She shot the director a frosty stare, explaining, "He's tired from his tests." What a rude nurse. I'm this man's superior, and the director rose from his chair, glaring at Nurse Kathy. But she simply pointed to the door and repeated, "Please leave." "Boss, that doesn't matter here. This is a place where you follow the doctor's and nurse's instructions. You think being a boss works everywhere." The director's face turned beech red at that. It was like she'd called him out for flaunting his petty power. "How dare you? I'll remember your name." With a parting shot, the director stormed out of the room like he was running away. I listened to the receding footsteps, letting out a sigh of relief. "Would you like to lie down?" Kathy, as if nothing had happened, helps me to comfortably lay down. After laying down, all the exhaustion came to me. "Why don't you take a nap until it's time for dinner?" As she suggests this, she pulls the blanket up to my shoulders. I can't help but feel a little shy. "Thank you. That man, he's a bit of a problematic boss. I appreciate you sending him away." As Kathy is about to leave the room, I call out to her, and she slowly turns around. In her flat tone, she says, "It's my job." Right, but still, I wanted to say thank you. Upon hearing this, her hand, which was on the doorknob, stops. And slowly, she turns back towards me. Kathy looks at me with a strange expression. The moment I thought her feelings briefly showed on her face returns to its usual expressionless, iron mask. Without saying anything more, she leaves the room. Fortunately, the surgery was successful, and I continued my treatment towards recovery. My body was at its limit due to stress. Even after the surgery, I was told to rest properly. During my lengthy hospital stay, I set a goal for myself. That was to see Kathy's smile by the time I was discharged. I really wanted to see her smile. I also had a feeling that I wanted to grab her attention. Apparently, the director had visited the hospital several times after my surgery, but he never made it to my room. I was surprised to hear from another nurse that Kathy had turned him away every time. I was nothing but grateful to Kathy. I was attracted to her. All the strategies I came up with to see her smile ended in failure. Whether I prepared a horse mask or practiced magic tricks, everything was a bust. When I shared my Make Kathy Laugh project with other nurses, the news spread throughout the hospital. Getting advice from other patients, brainstorming strategies together, my hospital life quickly became more fulfilling. Yesterday, finally, a seemingly exasperated Kathy told me to focus on my treatment since I'm the patient. From then on, every time I try to make her laugh, I get scolded with the same line. One day, as my discharge date was approaching, I got an urgent call on my cell phone from my colleague, Laura. There had been a customer who was a regular complainer, making numerous complaints every day, causing work to be disrupted. Normally, I would be the one dealing with this customer. The complaints were usually about simple things like wrong order or late delivery, nothing too serious. But this time, it seemed the customer was extremely angry because they received a different product than the one they ordered. I understand the situation, but I'm in the hospital. If you can't handle it, just escalate it to upper management. Let them deal with all of it, I advised. Normally, I could handle most complaints at my level. But this time, I'm afraid the bosses would have to step up. Laura said she would do that and hung up. The complainer was a guy named Mr. Ferguson, who ran a couple of bars and snack joints. He could be a bit tricky at times, but he wasn't unreasonable. As long as the first step in handling the complaint was correct, there shouldn't have been any problems. I've never experienced a complaint so severe that the phone didn't stop ringing for days. The day after Laura's call, my boss barged into my hospital room. He burst past the nurses who were trying to stop him, giving me quite a surprise. "Director, what's going on?" His forehead was covered in sweat, and his usually crisp suit looked somewhat worn out. "You've been handling that complainer and smoothing things over. It's your responsibility. Contact him and sort this out, now." He tossed the company cell phone at me, which made me feel exasperated. I did not pick up the company cell phone, so the director kept yelling at me, saying that I should be grateful that a useless person like me could be of use. I was starting to worry about causing a disturbance in the hospital. Reluctantly, I picked up the company cell phone. "Is it you again? This is a hospital. Please, keep it down." Just as I was about to make the call, Kathy entered the room. The nurse who had initially tried to stop the boss had apparently fetched Kathy from another ward. She was stone cold, glaring at the director without flinching. With her imposing demeanor, the director was taken aback. "I'm giving this good-for-nothing some work. Don't meddle with company affairs. You're just a nurse." Just as the boss's tirade was coming to an end, Kathy swiftly grabbed the company cell phone from my hand. Then she shoved it into the director's chest pocket, rather forcefully. "From this moment, this room is off-limits to visitors. Why don't you go back and do your own job?" Kathy said as she pushed the boss out of the room and closed the door behind him. I heard a click as a sign was hung on the doorknob. It must be a no-visitor sign. I could hear the director yelling outside the room. He made a ruckus for a while, but it seemed like he was escorted out by the security guards who came rushing. In the end, from what I heard from another nurse, he was even begging Nurse Kathy. I did feel a bit sorry for him, but I think it served as a good lesson for the director. Afterwards, it appears that the director got more complaints from a customer while handling a complaint. In the end, our regular client, Mr. Ferguson, said he would switch to another liquor store, effectively terminating his contract with us. It was a major blow to the company, and after a thorough investigation into the cause of the complaint, a revelation came to light. The director had rearranged the office on his own, and it seems a new and experienced worker had been put in charge of order reception. With no one to assist, the newbie was left to handle everything on their own. That's when the mistakes at the reception started piling up and caused the complaint. There are so many types of alcohol that you can't count them all. Without an experienced receptionist, it's difficult to understand specific wine brands. Normally, an experienced office worker would be assisting the newbie. But the director jumped the gun with the reorganization for cost-cutting, causing chaos throughout the office and the entire company. When the cause of the huge loss to the company was reported to the CEO, his reputation took a nosedive. Now he's been labeled as incompetent despite being an elite, and seems to be finding it hard to stay in the company. "What are you writing?" Kathy, who came to change my foredrip, peered at my computer screen. "I'm writing my own know-how on dealing with complaints. The method varies depending on the customer. Now, that director seems to have been assigned to handle complaints. The director, while retaining his title, has been told to take the lead in handling complaints. A colleague told me that he's been tormented every day by troublesome complainants. I think it would be a plus for both the customers and the company if I could contribute to handling complaints in any way." "Are you going to aid the enemy?" I get slightly embarrassed as she tells me this with a somewhat unresolved look. I'd rather see a smile on your face than that shocked look. In the end, I never got to see a smile on Kathy's face during my hospital stay. After a hospital life of over a month, I finally reached the day of my discharge. The attending physician and nurses who took care of me in the ward see me off at the hospital entrance. I'm about to get emotional as I even receive a bouquet of flowers as a discharge celebration. Kathy is also here among the people seeing me off. With her usual emotionless face, she stares at me. "I've been in your care a lot, Kathy." When I stand in front of Kathy to express my gratitude, I end up witnessing something unbelievable. "You did well, John. Congratulations on your discharge." With that, she softly flashes a smile, as beautiful as a blossoming flower. I'm about to drop the bouquet in my hands from the surprise. I thought to myself, what a terrible woman she was at the end. After all the effort, she wouldn't smile at me, but at the moment we'd never see each other again. She shows me a smile. Memories of my hospitalization with her cross my mind one after another. Once I start to recall the fun moments, I can't hold back anymore. I burst into tears in reaction to her smile. Seeing this, the people sending me off start to roar with laughter. I'm so embarrassed. Unable to hold myself back, I crouch down on the spot. Well, do not cry like that. People who work hard deserve a little reward. This is just a bonus. Kathy whispers this while gently patting my crouched back. A piece of notepaper, roughly inscribed with her familiar handwriting, has her cell phone number on it, and she gently places it in my hand. Below it are the words, "Contact me if you feel like it. I'll be waiting." By the time I stop crying in surprise and look up, she's already returned to the send-off line, waving with her usual emotionless face. I wave back at everyone while expressing my thanks, then get into a taxi. In the moment I get in, I call Kathy's cell phone. "You're impatient, aren't you?" After 5 rings, she answers the phone with a soft chuckle. I hadn't thought about how to ask her out and can't find the words in my sudden panic. Will you date me with the intention of marriage?" This was the first thing that came out. Even the taxi driver turns around in surprise. I'm so embarrassed I wish I could disappear into a hole. Isn't that a bit too hasty, but okay. Perhaps I found the treasure of my life in a hospital and I was too lucky. A few years later, I can't help but grin imagining her standing next to me in a white bridal dress. How did you enjoy today's story? Subscribe the channel and give us likes. It gives us motivation for our production activities. We're also looking forward to hearing your comments. See you again in the next video. Normally, I wouldn't be working in a place like this. Every day, all I had were complaints. One day, I opened the door to my apartment to find an unfamiliar woman changing her clothes. I thought I was hallucinating due to stress and dissatisfaction. "Sorry, I can see you there." To my words, she calmly, "My name is Tommy Reynolds. I work for a sports equipment manufacturer. On my 29th birthday this year, I reached the top of the sales department. I was featured in an interview in the company newsletter, published monthly, as the top salesperson. Among my colleagues, I was considered the most successful. I take pride in myself and have always approached my job with pride. I think it's the result of hard work, not talent. But in this world, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. I wish I could have warned my past self, who thought he would be fine. The person who undermined me was my direct superior. I had been mistreated by this boss for a long time. The meeting times were wrong. He intentionally didn't pass on messages from clients, and there were too many incidents to count on both hands. I had managed to pull through so far, but this time it became irreversible. That client had promised me a large contract. On the day of the contract, my boss schemed to steal my deal. He gave me the wrong time. As a result, I was late on the contract date, and my boss, who was asked to explain the details to the client's representative again, couldn't answer anything. The client became suspicious, and we lost the big contract. My boss pinned all the blame on me. He reported to the top that it was because I was late. My boss, who is a relative of the company's president, got his way, and all my claims were rejected. My colleagues all looked at me with sympathetic eyes. The verdict for me was a demotion. I received orders to be dispatched to a factory in the countryside near the ocean, a rural town in California. I was off the fast track, and I left the headquarters while my boss saw me off through with a sneering smile. The factory I was dispatched to was a sewing factory near the sea. I was given the position of office manager. The factory had a factory manager, and there was no such position as office manager in the first place. It was a made-up position for me, a sinecure. I guess the rumor about me had reached the factory. Everyone was wondering why the top salesman who graced the company newsletter was assigned to their factory. The factory manager is a gentle, kind person who is loved by everyone and is about to retire soon. He never asked me in depth about this personnel change. And so my new life began. I was told that the company housing was fully occupied, and I rented an apartment near the factory. It's so run down and almost laughable. Surprisingly though, it's clean, and that was the only saving grace. I don't have the same passion for my job anymore, of course. My work is nothing more than checking the time cards of the employees working in the factory at a small office. Every day, it's the same routine with nothing exciting going on. I never thought I'd see the day, but now I go home on time every day. I enjoy a slow walk back to my apartment, while gazing at the sea shimmering in the sunset. This walk back home has become my only joy. One day, I heard some noise from my apartment when I returned. Of course, I locked it before leaving, and I had the key. The word burglar flashed through my mind. I slowly turned the doorknob. It wasn't locked. Pulling the doorknob towards me, the door swung wide open. What lay before my eyes was a strange woman changing clothes. A half-naked woman was staring at me with a bewildered expression. "Hi, sorry, I can see you." That's the first thing that slipped out of my mouth. Oh, how embarrassing. The woman in mid-change continued to change without hesitation. Regaining my senses, I rushed out of the apartment and slammed the door shut. As the door shut with a loud thud, I could hear the woman's hearty laughter from inside. I double-checked the room number multiple times. This was definitely my apartment. I didn't recognize the woman who was laughing inside. Summer is near, and I braced myself if she might be somewhat unusual. "I kept you waiting. Please, come in." A carefree voice from inside the apartment called out to me, who was crouching down with my head in my hands. No, this is my apartment, I thought, but nervously opened the door. She had a healthy tan skin and big expressive eyes, unlike anyone I've seen around here. "Who are you?" I was dumbfounded as she tilted her head and asked. This apartment, it's mine." From her expression, it didn't seem like she had the slightest idea that she might be in the wrong place. I showed her the key I had and explained that this was my apartment. Then she showed me her key, with a dolphin keychain attached. She said this was her friend's apartment, and she had a spare key. Indeed, when we tried it, her key opened the door without a problem. "I'll call my friend and check," she said, and called her friend on her smartphone. After about 3 minutes of talking, she hung up the phone and bowed deeply. "I'm so sorry. It seems like she moved out, and the landlord hasn't changed the locks yet. I apologize for the trouble. Apparently, her friend used to live in this apartment and has since moved out." Unaware of this fact, she had entered the apartment using the spare key as usual. The landlord not changing the lock seems to be the root cause. "No, really," I said, then I replied to her desperate bow with a bow of my own. After all, I had accidentally gotten a full view of a young woman changing. "Well, let's call it even then." She raised her head with a cheery grin. Her name was Jennifer Watson. She'd come to this town, which felt a lot like San Diego, to help out at a friend's dive shop during the busy season. She'd stayed in this room every year, not realizing her friend had moved. "So, Jennifer, are you a diving instructor?" Not quite feeling right to simply shoo her out, I offered her some iced tea I'd made in advance. "Thank you," she said, draining the glass with apparent enjoyment. "I do instruct, but I mostly do free diving. It's a pricey sport, you know." She laughed as I, clueless about the difference between diving and freediving, looked puzzled. Jennifer was a freediving athlete. More specifically, a constant weight freediver. A sport where you dive deep into the ocean without an oxygen tank. I worked for a sport goods manufacturer, but I didn't know much about such a niche sport. I bet there aren't many competitors in the sport, huh? There aren't as many in the US. It's on the rise, but it originated in Europe. Jennifer educated me about this world I knew nothing of. Past a certain depth, you lose buoyancy and just sink. Being sucked into the pitch-black ocean floor is a feeling beyond description, she said with a chuckle. The mere thought of sinking to the ocean floor gave me the chills. When I told her that, she burst out laughing. "Why not start with snorkeling? Since you live in this coastal town, you should make the most of the sea." Before I could respond, I heard a car honk from outside the window. Her friend seemed to have arrived to pick her up. "Oh, looks like my ride's here. See you around. I'll come by to invite you for diving," she said before making a swift exit. I felt like I'd been struck by lightning, staring blankly at the closed front door for a while. It was the first time I'd felt excited since moving to this town. Her sudden appearance had brought fresh air into my stale life. A few days later, she popped into the factory where I worked. She'd brought lunch to her friend for lunchtime at the factory. I couldn't afford to make you a lunchbox. Yet as she said this, she tossed an absurdly large sandwich to me. Watch out for the lunch bomb. The contents of the sandwich she'd brought was thick ham and scrambled egg. Made it a meal of itself. Apparently, she knew the factory manager too. As I savored the sandwich given to me by Jennifer, the factory manager brought over some iced tea. You seem to know Jennifer well. Well, there's a bit of history there, I replied, prevaricating, unable to admit that I had seen her changing clothes. Taking a sip of his iced tea, the factory manager announced he had something to discuss. A first since he took the position. I was immediately tense, worried about some issue at the factory. But his talk had nothing to do with the factory at all. He asked if I knew Jennifer was a free diving athlete, who I had peeked at her changing for. I nodded in agreement. Great, that speeds things up. He gave a firm nod of his hand. He asked if I, ex-top salesperson, could approach her to offer sponsor. When it came to international competitions, the costs add up quickly. Apparently, she had had to give up on competitions because she couldn't afford them before. He wanted to support her, but being out of touch with the headquarters, he was unable to help. He thought that if anyone could get headquarters moving, it would be me, who used to be a top salesperson. I was unable to respond to this unexpected request. I knew nothing about free diving, nor who Jennifer really was. I told the factory manager my thoughts honestly. Well then, let's start with diving, he suggested, pointing at the calendar with a grin. It seemed my days off would be spent by the sea for a while. The factory manager was always quick to act, a characteristic I attribute to competent people. On my next day off following our conversation, I was promptly enrolled in a diving school, with theoretical lessons in the morning followed by practical ones in the afternoon. Raised in the city, the deep sea was an unknown world to me. Jennifer was there to gently support me as I cautiously approached it. The first time I dived into the sea, it was, to put it mildly, awesome. While there was a lot to learn, and it wasn't all fun and games. Yet, looking up at the sea surface from beneath, glistening with sunlight, and being enveloped by the gentle seawater was indescribable. The bubbles I exhaled climbing to the sea surface seemed like a scene from a fairy tale. I was captivated by the sea in just one day. You'll get addicted, Jennifer had told me just before diving. Turned out she was spot on. After finishing the practical diving session and the school finished for the day, I accompanied Jennifer for her free diving practice. She hung a guide rope, relaxing and floating on the surface of the water. A countdown began 2 minutes in advance, and she was to begin her dive within 10 seconds of the official top announcement. Overstepping that would result in a penalty. After a series of deep breaths to fill her lungs with air, she disappeared beneath the water. All that was left for us in the venue was to watch the clock and wait for her to resurface. The tension during this time was beyond imagination. There's a clip attached at the depth, one declares. You must remove it and safely resurface. Apparently, some athletes faint from lack of air. The fear was magnified after doing a dive, falling into the depths of the sea due to gravity without an oxygen cylinder on your back. A few minutes can feel incredibly long. Eventually, she emerged on the sea surface. As per the procedure, she said, "I'm okay." Just like that. She removed her nose clip and smiled. I'm well versed in land sports, but it was the first time I saw free diving up close. I thought the way the team came together in tension to support her was impressive. The concept of doing it for someone else came to mind. I might be able to do it. It was a moment when the switch in my head turned on after a long time. From that day, I went to the sea on my holidays. Of course, I got a license. I accompanied her many times in her practice and built up an image in my mind. I also became friends with the people at the diving shop and guest house. They are all cheerful and love the sea. No one speaks ill of Jennifer. It seemed they were purely cheering for her dream. The expectations weighing on me are also huge. To make her dream come true, my hard work is essential. It was a long time since I was transferred that I visited the headquarters. There is no marine sports department in my company. I decided to take on the challenge of making presentation to establish a new department. The headquarters were as lively as before after a long time. I pulled myself together and attended the internal presentation. The trigger for taking the step was a single phrase from her. There's no marine sports department. Then you should create one. If there's no place, create it yourself. Make the most of your unique strengths and do something that no one else can think of. There are faces of colleagues and bosses who have trapped me at the presentation. I can't fail. A long-lost fighting spirit lit up within me. The presentation was a great success. The president is very interested in launching a new department. He was also interested in nurturing young athletes. In a few days, the CEO and several headquarters staff members will come to watch a mock freediving competition. We've reached the tipping point. The presentation was a success. The bosses are coming to watch the mock competition, not just for Jennifer. Can't other athletes participate as well? I contacted her right away. On the other end of the phone, everyone was celebrating the success of my presentation. Understood. I'll gather the people, you decide the day. I really appreciate all of your help. I heard her voice sound a little tearful. I'm the one who should be saying thank you. Without her support, I don't think I could have recovered. At the CEO's request, the arrangement for the mock competition was made quickly. On the day of the event, it was sunny, and the sea surface was reflecting the sunlight brilliantly. We hired a chartered bus, and the bosses arrived. They planned to visit the factory in the morning and watch the free diving mock competition in the afternoon. It seemed to be the first time the CEO visited the factory, and the factory managers were busy with the hospitality. Surprisingly, the factory manager and the CEO seemed to be old friends. Listening to their conversation filled with old stories, it seemed the factory manager was the top salesperson among their peers. The factory manager also seemed to have quite a past. At a barbecue on the beach, the athletes and local divers mingled. I arranged direct conversations with the CEO about diving, the competition, and the predicaments the athletes face. In the open atmosphere, the lunch meeting proceeded smoothly. That's when a man made a snide remark in a noticeably loud voice. He was picking on a young girl even though he wasn't drunk. He was openly ridiculing the free diving competition as just diving. When I checked the source of the voice, it was my former boss who had undermined me. I wasn't expecting him to be accompanying this tour, so my mood sunk a bit. In front of the athletes, my former boss kept provoking by saying that this mundane sport wouldn't work for promotion. Although there were athletes who got angry, Jennifer stepped in and stopped them. It's pretty lame to pretend to know something you don't and then make fun of it, she said, looking straight into my ex-boss's face. Unable to find a retort, he glared at her, his face turning bright red. Even when glared at, she remained calm. She had confidence and conviction. As we started spending more time together, I found myself drawn to her just like I was drawn to the sea. I haven't told her yet, but if this presentation is successful, I intend to confess my feelings to her. The mock competition in the afternoon was a huge success. Since it was done while explaining the rules of the competition one by one, it was easy to understand even for those watching freediving for the first time. She patiently answered every question thrown by the CEO and other employees. The CEO and the others seemed to have felt the same excitement and tension I felt when I first watched freediving. They were also fascinated by the charm of the staff involved in this competition. The presentation, including the mock competition, was a huge success. On the spot, the CEO made a contract with their team. He promised to provide full backup. He even expressed a desire to obtain a diving license at a diving school next weekend. So, another man fascinated by the sea was born. I'm going back to the head office to establish a marine sports division. The former boss, who had a condescending attitude towards them, was demoted by the CEO. It seems he caused various troubles while I was not at the headquarters. Honestly, I'm relieved that I no longer have the opportunity to work with him, because I don't want him to interfere with this project. And several months have passed since I returned to the headquarters. A poster featuring her is prominently displayed in the headquarters lobby. Upon hearing that she is not just a model but an active player, my colleagues seemed unable to hide their surprise. The relationship between me and her seems to have taken a step forward and a step back. Of course, I told her my feeling like a man. She laughed and said, "I'm okay." But now, she is diving the seas around the world. There are few tournaments in Japan. The main battlefield is the seas around the world. It's a dangerous competition, so I get nervous on tournament days. I'm anxious about her safety. But she's different. She's enjoying the seas around the world. I started to feel like it's impossible to tie her down with words like marriage. "When will you return to the US next time, Jennifer?" I can hear the sound of the waves behind Jennifer. She must have just gotten out of the sea. "I'll be back in the US next week." Her voice is a bit patchy, maybe because the signal is weak. No matter how far away she is, she contacts me. My return this time is special. Jennifer says in a somewhat desperate tone. I'm getting nervous at the seriousness of Jennifer's voice. I don't think it's a breakup, but... "Jennifer, what happened?" I timidly ask Jennifer, who is sighing on the other end of the phone. "Why are you sighing? What's wrong? Is there anything I can do?" I repeat my words, anxious. I was pretending to be okay even when we're apart, but actually, I'm not. "Then you have to take responsibility." After a brief silence, I heard a sulky voice. "Why are you making me wait like this? You better step up and propose properly." With that, the call abruptly ended. I stood there, dumbfounded, clutching my smartphone. Snapping back to reality, I left work early and rushed to the jewelry store. I was hustling and bustling about, preparing for the proposal. Then, the day of her arrival came. The PR team was also in attendance to cover her return. I guess the proposal would have to wait, I thought. When I spotted her coming out of the arrival gate, I waved slightly, and she ran towards me. She had just left her luggage right there. With such momentum, she threw herself onto me, and I was knocked to the floor. "I'm back. Now, propose." "Hold on, right here, really." The exchange between us was all heard by the PR team, and the pictures graced the cover of the company newsletter the following month. Let me propose in a more relaxed setting. It's been 5 years since we got married, but I think I'll never forget the words I shouted that day. It still gets a lot of laughs at parties, and she's still laughing about it today. I hope you enjoyed that. Subscribing to our channel gives us motivation to create more content. We'll see you again in the next video. I was a middle-aged man in the middle of nowhere, serving drinks to my boss at a company party and trying to keep him in a good mood. I'm turning 32 this year. As my friends and co-workers get married one by one, there hasn't been a hint of romance in my life. I know, just waiting won't lead to any romantic encounters. But there's someone I can't seem to forget, which is likely why I don't feel compelled to actively seek a partner. Once my boss's lengthy monologue finally concluded, I excused myself to the restroom. I thought I might step outside and get a breath of fresh air, just to space out a bit, and as I was wandering down the hallway of the bar, I bumped into her. The person I would never forget, my high school sweetheart. She has a more mature vibe now, but it was definitely Susan. She seemed to have noticed me too and stopped in the middle of the hallway. "Jack." She called my name, then fell silent. "It's been a while. I'm here having drinks with my boss." We hadn't been in touch for over a decade since our falling out, so I wasn't sure how to interact with her. I'm here for dinner, with friends." Despite this unexpected reunion, that was all the conversation we managed to have. We parted ways with a simple "well then." Susan and I dated since high school, and our relationship continued even as we attended different colleges. But we broke up over a fight during our job hunting phase. I was the one to blame. Susan, a brilliant and beautiful woman, was attending a prestigious university. She secured a job relatively early. However, I was the complete opposite. I attended a mediocre college and had a hard time finding a job. During my senior year, I grew frustrated as I still couldn't land a job. It would have been bearable if that was it, but I was jealous of Susan. Despite her trying to support me and consider my feelings, I, back then, felt pitiful as if being pitied. I lashed out at her with harsh words like, "You wouldn't understand how I feel, you're probably looking down on me, and stop acting like a goody two-shoes, making a fool out of me." I even said something far worse. It was only natural that she eventually got fed up with me. After parting with Susan, I managed to secure a job at my current company. But there was no more communication between Susan and me. In my 20s, I learned from a high school classmate that Susan got married and moved to Chicago due to her husband's job transfer. I had mixed feelings, but also felt relieved. As long as she was happy somewhere, that was good enough for me. After hearing about her marriage, I thought it was about time for me to move on as well, so I did go on a few blind dates, but I never really met anyone suitable. And that brings us to now. About a week after running into Susan at the bar, I was visiting my favorite cafe after work. I enjoy buying coffee beans from this place and brewing coffee at home on my days off. I developed a love for coffee back in college. Now, I've become so particular about selecting beans and how I grind them. As I entered the cafe, eager for a new batch of beans, there was Susan, enjoying a cake set. This was our second encounter. "We meet again," I murmured, surprised at the unexpected coincidence. "Really, are you alone?" I briefly explained that I often come here to buy coffee beans. "What about you? Are you alone? Isn't your husband waiting at home? I didn't even know you were back from Chicago." At my words, Susan lowered her eyes. And she opened her mouth, putting on a forced smile. "My husband passed away 4 years ago. I've been living in Chicago since then. I've only recently moved back here." "I see. I'm sorry, that was thoughtless of me." I didn't know her husband had passed away. I thought she was still building a happy home. After that, our conversation didn't continue and we said see you and parted again. Susan, who lost her husband and lives alone in San Francisco. I want to talk to her more, I want to get closer to her, but I don't feel I have the right because I hurt her with my harsh words at the end of our relationship. About a month later, on a night of a terrible typhoon, I had my third encounter with my widow ex-girlfriend, Susan. My apartment is beyond the station, so I passed by the station on my way home from work. The station was crowded with people. The trains were stopped or delayed. In the midst of all this, I found Susan on the phone, taking shelter from the rain. Susan also noticed me immediately and called out to me. Amazing, we met again. Yeah, is the train stopped? When I asked, Susan nodded with a bitter smile. It's stopped. I don't know when it'll start moving again, but both the buses and taxis are crowded with people, so it doesn't look like I'll be able to get on. I just tried calling a nearby hotel, but it's no good. It's hard to find a place that's open. Even when it's not a typhoon, this station is busy, so I guess that's inevitable. But when I glanced at Susan, her clothes and hair were wet. Even though it's early spring, the nights are chilly. I handed her a handkerchief. Use this, you must be cold. Oh, thank you. I had an umbrella, but the rain and wind were so strong. When I found Susan, the rain and wind had just calmed down, but before that, both the rain and the wind had been terrible, and the sky looked like it was going to start pouring again soon. I couldn't just leave Susan, who had no way to get home or a hotel to stay in. Do you want to come to my place? The words naturally slipped out of my mouth, but I immediately regretted them. There's no way she'd want to come to the home of her ex-boyfriend, who she always fought with. That's what I thought, but Susan's response was unexpected. You're willing to let me stay? When I looked at Susan, she looked up at me with moist eyes. I felt nervous looking into the eyes of her, who had become more mature. But those eyes seemed to be asking me for help. Sure, come on. At my words, Susan smiled softly and seemed relieved. And so, Susan came to stay at my apartment. When we got home, I had Susan, who was probably cold from getting wet, took a bath. Seeing Susan with her wet hair after the bath, wearing my clothes as a change of pajamas, made my heart race, but I had no ulterior motive in inviting her, so I tried to hide it. After drying her hair, Susan said, I'd like some coffee. Could you brew it for me? I've been missing it for a while. There was a bag of coffee beans and a grinder where Susan was looking. I used to make coffee for her frequently when we were in college and dating. Sure, I replied. I ground the beans carefully, just for Susan. She was watching me so attentively that I asked, do you want to try grinding the beans? At first, Susan nodded, but then she hesitated and said, actually, I'll pass. I want you to do it, Jack. I've missed your coffee, she said. Even if her words were just courtesy, they made me happy. As the coffee was almost ready, I asked her how she wanted it. Do you want it as a café au lait? Yes, you remember that, she said. Susan couldn't drink black coffee. When we were dating, I always made it into café au lait by adding milk for her. I still remembered it well. Of course, I remember it. I said, offering Susan the freshly made café au lait. Susan took the mug from me with both hands and carefully brought it to her lips. Ah, it's delicious. The aroma is soothing. I've missed this. I've missed your café au lait after we broke up. I've been wanting to drink it for over 10 years. I've been holding back for more than 10 years. The phrase more than 10 years seemed to have a significant weight. I poured my own coffee too. Like in my college days and even now, I prefer it black. Drinking my own brewed coffee is my daily routine, but today's coffee, which I shared with Susan, tasted even better than usual. After finishing our coffee, we discussed where we were going to sleep. Jokingly, I asked, "I only have one bed. Is it okay if we sleep together?" I wanted Susan, who seemed to feel guilty for staying over, to at least smile. I figured she'd retort with something like, "No, it's not okay," since she's got a vibe like that. But her reply was, "Okay." Stunned, I looked at Susan, who was looking at me with a serious expression. "I've been lonely since my husband passed away," she said. I couldn't help but feel an urge to hug Susan. But I knew this didn't mean she had feelings for me. Susan has been spending lonely nights since her husband's death. Today, perhaps due to the stormy weather, her loneliness had just erupted. I thought if she spent the night in the same room or bed with me, she'd regret it. And not just Susan. I might regret letting the mood carry me away, even though I care about her. So I thought there was only one thing I could do. "Susan, I'm sorry for my inappropriate joke. You can sleep on the bed. I'll sleep on the living room couch. I don't want you to regret anything because of your current feelings," I said. Maybe Susan had anticipated what I was going to say. Susan nodded without arguing or saying anything. "No, you're right. I'm sorry," she said. It seemed Susan agreed, which relieved me. Even though I decided not to get swept away, considering that this might be the last time I saw Susan, I thought I should apologize for something I had wanted to apologize for a long time. "Susan, I'm sorry about when we broke up." "When we broke up? Do you mean the argument we had?" I found myself rethinking whether I could call what happened an argument. From the moment we started dating until we broke up, I never saw a single fault in Susan. When we were in high school, I once asked her why she would even consider dating a guy like me. Back then, just like now, I was a pretty ordinary guy, mediocre at academics and sports. In contrast, Susan was rumored to be adorable, an honor student, popular with teachers, and highly academic. I just couldn't see what balanced out between us. But as it turns out, Susan and I did not meet for the first time in high school. Apparently, we were in the same class in kindergarten, a fact I had forgotten. I'm told I protected Susan back then when she was being bullied. From that point on, I was considered a hero in Susan's eyes. Susan moved away when we were in senior kindergarten, but she told me that she never forgot about me. I had no recollection of doing anything so admirable. I vaguely remember helping a girl back then, but I feel like I was just trying to show off, being a little kindergartner. Susan recounted the story of our kindergarten days several times after we started dating. I used to find it cute that she remembered such things, but by the time I was job hunting, I was sick of hearing it. Because it just wasn't possible for a pathetic guy like me, who couldn't even secure a job, to be a hero. That was when I had just been rejected by the 10th company. I was feeling the bitter truth of how much your alma mater matters in job hunting. With no job offers coming my way, I felt like I was being denied as a person. Susan, who had already secured a job, was trying to encourage me. But I was so immature at that time, I found Susan's kindness annoying. So I told her, "Shut up. Everything is so perfect for you, Susan. You've always been a top student, got into a good college, found a job right away. You don't know what it feels like to be a failure like me." Susan's eyes were welling up with tears. "Don't talk like that about yourself, Jack. You're my hero." But I was even frustrated with my job search, and my frustration was maxed out when she told me this story. "I'm tired of hearing that story. I don't know it. I can't remember stuff from kindergarten. Stop imposing your ideals on me. I'm not your hero. In fact, I don't want to hear your pointless stories anymore. You're annoying me." I still can't forget the look on Susan's face when I said that. It was hurt, That day I told her to go away, and she left, her shoulders drooping. After that, I ignored Susan, who kept apologizing. I just wanted her to leave me alone. Then one day, she told me over the phone, "Let's break up." It was only natural, considering the awful things I had said. All I think I said was, "I understand." As I was reminiscing, Susan's voice brought me back to reality. She was laughing at my apology, a decade late. "No, it's okay. It's not all your fault, you know. Looking back, I think I should have stood back and watched over you a little more. I was young, and I just thought I had to be there for you, that I had to say something to encourage you. I think that just put more pressure on you and made you more irritated. Maybe we were just too young, both of us." I was happy at Susan's kindness, saying that even though I was the one to blame. But you know, when we met again in high school after being apart since kindergarten, I really thought it was destiny, but I guess it wasn't. We really can't be together, can we? I had nothing to say to that. That day we slept in separate rooms, and when I woke up the next day, Susan was gone from my apartment. The room without Susan felt cold, as if the temperature had dropped. That's when I spotted a note from Susan on the table. "If we meet again, I hope we can be together next time." I saw that and ran out of the house. Surprisingly, I caught up with Susan quickly as I ran towards the station. She was walking slowly, her eyes swollen from crying. I moved to stand in front of Susan and took her hand. I squeezed her slightly cold hand warmly before expressing my feelings. "I'm sorry. I said I'd regret it if I let things slide yesterday, but that was just an excuse. The truth is, I've always loved you and I still do. I was just being a coward yesterday. I was scared. I had hurt you once, and I wondered if I could make you happy again. I also thought I definitely couldn't beat your deceased husband. I was thinking if it was okay for me, if I had the right to say I wanted to be by your side. I was scared and couldn't say anything." Susan's handwriting on the note was shaky. I thought she must have written it while crying, and my chest tightened, so I started running. "Susan, you said our reunion in high school was destiny. I feel the same way. I think our reunion here as adults is destiny. I won't hurt you anymore. I'll cherish you in my own way, without comparing to anyone else. So I want to be with you. Please give me another chance. Will you date me?" After I finished speaking, I felt somewhat embarrassed. I mean, a guy over 30 talking about destiny. But it seemed Susan felt the same way. She chuckled and said, "Sometimes you can be such a romantic, Jack, but I like that about you." Susan and I smiled and made eye contact. "Do you want to go back to my place again? I'll make you a delicious cup of coffee. Of course, I'll make yours a latte. Let's talk about the past and the future." "That sounds good. I have a lot of things I want to talk about, too." We then walked hand in hand back to my place. Since then, Susan and I have been dating smoothly, and tomorrow, after about a year, we are getting married. Today we came to visit the grave of Susan's previous husband. This is not the first time I've come to visit his grave with Susan. Before I confessed to Susan, I was pessimistic about whether I could make her happy like her previous husband did. But I realized it's not about comparing. The fact that her husband cherished Susan, I accept that, and I decided to cherish Susan in my own way. That's why I visited the grave that I wanted him to rest easy. I'll protect Susan's smile. When Susan asked what I was thinking about when I was paying respects, I kept it a secret. It's a secret conversation between men that I can't tell Susan. Susan was sulking, saying, "I'm curious," but she seemed rather happy. After visiting the grave, we returned to our new home. Our own home to live in together. When I was about to make coffee, Susan said she preferred juice. She usually doesn't say things like that, so I was worried and asked if she was feeling unwell. But seeing me flustered, Susan grinned. Then she placed a hand on her stomach and said, "I'll have to pass on the latte for a while. The caffeine might startle this little one." As I realized what her words meant, I couldn't help but yell out in joy. I held Susan in my arms. Our baby is due in 7 months. I can't wait for this new chapter of our lives. So, how did you like our story? Your subscription to our channel greatly motivates us to create more content. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video.